Welcome back, everyone, to the afternoon session. We are loosely calling the afternoon session digitization. Next up will be Michael Bennett with his presentation, Advancing the Image Through Automation, Leveraging the Interplay Between Human and Machine. Michael is the head of digital imaging and conservation at the University of Connecticut. And Michael, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks for the introduction, Robert. Okay, is that looking good? Okay, today I'd like to talk a bit about humans, machines, and a few of the real-world imaging system designs that involve the two. Since 2016, we've been co-designing custom automation systems and putting them into production at the UConn Digital Imaging Lab. These flexible systems continue to serve us well in numerous ways, and I'd like to talk a bit about a few of them. Before I get into that, however, I'd like to talk about a few design principles that we've come to observe over time. These first include the idea of systems and how they should include both humans and machines. And by machines, I mean things like general hardware, programmable logic controllers, and software. From there, we normally start with either an established semi-successful manual system or prototype something new and then ID throughput friction points, unwanted process variance, and/or data gathering limitations. Finally, we begin to gradually automate workflow steps in response to these elements through prototypes and then continue to iterate, usually by incrementally swapping in programmable hardware and/or software efficiencies. I'll go into this further in the following slides. Let's talk about image stitching for a moment. It's a common technique used in oversized object capture. Image stitching involves the use of close-focused overlapping image tiles for images that cannot be photographed with a sufficient amount of spatial resolution in a single shot. Roughly 1/3 overlap among adjacent tiles is normally considered sufficient for final photo merging in software. The shooting of image tiles often involves the manual movement of oversized items across table surfaces and/or the use of skids. Proper alignment to ensure 1/3 overlap among tile borders is normally an exercise in leveraging visual landmarks on the object itself through camera live view or the deployment of external alignment tools to best move the object from shot to shot. However, these methods can be cumbersome when shooting large multi-row and multi-column objects. Accurate alignment can often be difficult to gauge when visual landmarks like object edges are nowhere to be found in live view or are very far away from distant alignment tools. In turn, this can result in process variance during shooting, which can then disrupt photo merging software algorithms which favor consistency of capture in order to successfully work. With particularly large objects, proper handling and staging can create their own friction points. This is where an automated XY table can be really useful. Here is the first one we built in 2016. One of the system's main attributes is that once an object is placed down on the table surface, the object doesn't need to be manually moved from shot to shot. Instead, the entire support surface moves programmatically beneath a stationary overhead camera. This results in much less handling by the photographer, far greater throughput, less process variance, and less wear on the mostly old, mostly oversized, and sometimes brittle formats that require this capture technique. Additionally, since the table's programmable logic controller, which is on the left here, since it can mathematically calculate a consistent % overlap among adjacent image tiles based upon general parameters entered by the human user, the resulting shots are very precisely photographed. As I mentioned earlier, this in turn assists photo merge algorithms to do faster, more accurate image stitching in final post-processing. Getting back to staging for a moment, One of the unique design features of our lab's XY table is its controllable electrostatic surface. In practice, the table's electrostatic force is first fine-tuned through an adjustable controller. This allows for better handling and flattening of various types of paper grades and stocks all the way down to very brittle newspapers. With such lightweight paper, it is important to regulate the table's downward pull in order to avoid damaging fragile items. From there, the photographer can instantly turn the electrostatic force completely on or off with a foot switch that is cabled to the controller. Along with the entire table's operation, I have a number of brief demo videos of this particular feature up on YouTube. I'll share the links along with other pertinent resources towards the end of this talk. Whereas the XY table's movements and camera control are fully automated once programmed, and in essence replace manual human intervention once set into motion, this electrostatic control can be thought of as semi-automatic, for it offers a different combination of human and machine in concert with one another around the often delicate task of staging an object. The end goal, of course, is a better captured image. In this example, I'm first manually flattening a brittle page into place before hitting the foot switch between the last two figures in the sequence. Finally, I remove my hands and allow the electrostatic effect to hold the complete page down flat. From there, the table can be programmed as normal to do an automated multi-image tile routine. To paraphrase from the philosophy of, quote, calm, end quote, technology and design first outlined by Weiser and Brown at Xerox PARC, and more recently recontextualized by Amber Case, quote, both hardware and software systems should allow for what humans do best and leverage what machines do best, and that we should aim for designs where we are in command of the technology, not dominated by it. Here are some of the XY system's general specifications. A couple of things I'd like to point out. One is that the table's height is the same as every other table in the lab. I find this to be a very helpful component for overall ergonomics and for having consistent camera and light placement among workstations throughout the space. Also, manual override is an important attribute that I like to include for better overall flexibility and for times when programming an automated routine is more effort than needed for a given task, or where more deliberate human involvement is required for a given shot. Again, the concept here is not to let the technology get in the way of what a human can do better and faster for a given shooting scenario. Finally, ideas throughout the actual build process are best translated and discussed among co-designers through CAD. CAD is a designer's friend, and it can be useful in unexpected ways during a project. Here, for example, it was particularly helpful when we needed to better anticipate how to walk large table components through the narrow doors and hallways of the lab. We were able to answer these logistical questions in software ahead of delivery, along with determining how much of the system needed to be broken down and reassembled in the lab itself. Beyond oversized flat works on paper, we also successfully used the large XY table to digitize a batch of 9x9 aerial photography transparencies. The use case then was to help automate the capture of tiled film segments for high-resolution image stitching in post. Although this arrangement ended up working great for 9x9 format, our large XY table's size, ergonomics, and heavy-duty screw drive servo motors were not a good fit for the more precise XY movements needed for consistent high-throughput capture of additional file formats, like 35mm, which the Yukon archives have in abundance. But the basic XY engineering was a good starting point for a new, smaller, and lighter design, which we subsequently completed in 2019. And here's a view of what we came up with for that second XY table. And another view from a different angle. The light box and film holder arrangements can be easily removed from the table surface, which then convert the system back to a straightforward XY system, or XY table surface system. Here's the spec list for the design. Note that it is much smaller overall and that there are no big screw drive servos in this system since it's much lighter due to its smaller size and lack of heavy electrostatic board. Instead, there are two stepper motors and drive belts that are controlled by a Cognisys StackShot 3X. To go along with traditional speed, ramp, and dwell time stepper motor parameters, one can use the Cognisys to custom program the table's XY movements to follow a very precise stop-and-go grid pattern in 2D space. This can be leveraged to accommodate the unique but consistent geometries of various film formats and holders. In addition, the controller also allows for synchronized camera control so that both the camera and the table work in automated harmony. Okay, so how fast does this operate? Here are the more recent throughput rates of the XY system's full auto and semi-auto modes compared to a traditional Epson film scanner. Auto and semi-auto modes are differentiated by the use of either an autofocus or manual focus lens. And by auto, that means with a single gesture on the Cognisys touchscreen, an entire holder of slide film can be shot without further user intervention. As can be seen, the XY system can accomplish much greater throughput compared to a traditional photo scanner. In addition, the camera-based system can also achieve high FADGI performance ratings based upon other objective image quality measurements. So how good is its image performance? I won't go into exhaustive detail here due to time constraints. But in essence, 3,500 pixels per inch limiting spatial resolution and FADGI 4-star acceptance for both image sharpening and any presence of image flare or low contrast. So high quality coupled with high throughput. But as you noticed from the previous slide and its design, you can swap in any sort of camera system that you wish into a system like this because it's modular. Here's an example of how this system's throughput and imaging performance were applied to a sudden rush order that we had towards the end of 2019. We were able to capture, process, and deliver roughly 3,500 black and white 35mm slide and strip film negatives to high FADGI performance levels 30 days ahead of schedule, using the labor of a single trained 20-hour-per-week photo technician. So there's this concept of scale that naturally surfaces, where scalability can be thought of as the ability of a system to handle a growing amount of work. I'll circle back to this in a bit. I wanted to talk now for a moment about something beyond XY tables. We've also built automated image capture systems for 3D object capture and photogrammetric processing. In this example, which we use for medium-sized objects, there are even more Cognisys controllers, since we needed to be able to program camera movement in 3 planes, plus turntable rotation, and automate the firing of camera and lights. However, it's this much more simplistic and recent 3D rig that has me most excited of late. Born in 2020 as part of a work-from-home COVID-19 lockdown project, this small object 3D imaging system can produce high-quality, close-focus image sets that can in turn be used to create high-resolution photogrammetric geometry and visual information. It accomplishes this through focus stacking, which involves the acquisition of a bracket of images with varying focal points. These are then focus stacked through computational means into final rendered images that possess an increased depth of field that are usable for subsequent photogrammetric processing. And here's an example of how one given overall shooting session was done for one object orientation. 42 bracketed shots per object position on the turntable, 35 total 10-degree turntable moves between each focus bracketed series of shots. Yes, this is a lot of shooting. Luckily, it can be mostly accomplished unattended through programming and automation. With these images, you can then focus stack each bracketed series within software into a final image that has in-focus depth of field throughout an entire object. It's a technique often used by macro photographers. In our case, we employed the method to allow for extreme close focus of very small pieces. Through the Cognisys, we have very precise automated control of the camera's sequential movements and firings along the system's focus rails. In turn, the resulting focus stack depth of field is strictly specified from a carefully programmed bracket of source images. We can then use the abrupt blurring that occurs outside of the resulting depth of field to better isolate the subject within a given scene. This subsequently eliminates extraneous photogrammetric computation within a scene and lowers noise in rendered 3D data, as photogrammetry algorithms normally ignore out-of-focus areas of source images when creating subject point clouds. Looked at holistically, this is just another example of how automation can effectively manage possible shooting variance and result in marked efficiencies throughout numerous post-processing pipelines. Here's an example of a final textured 3D model as rendered in Agisoft Metashape Pro. The blue squares represent focus stacked images and their relative location during the shooting session. And here you can get a sense, hopefully, of the sub-millimeter levels of both visual and geometric detail that can result in a 3D rendering using these combined techniques. Let's take a second to do a deeper dive on that same point and its metrics. With this much raw data, precision and accuracy still come lots of required overall computation. But where you eventually arrive through these automated acquisition and processing techniques is to a place where the results of imaging scale begin to take on an alternative distinction, where it's no longer primarily a quest for how many total objects you can mass digitize to an accepted norm. Instead, it's more about trying to leverage the extended imaging capacities that automation can afford in order to push the margins of understanding of selected collection objects. In a way, what such rich raw and rendered image data facilitates is that it allows us to begin to gaze across the boundaries of standard perception and hypothesis to reimagine and reinterpret collection objects anew. Within this context, images that help form 3D texture are useful not just to make things look pretty. They can also serve to convey important information, visual information, to educators and specialists in fields like archaeology, anthropology, and the natural sciences, among others. This information, which has both quantitative and qualitative aspects, can form important gateways of new inquiry into objects and specimens, and can have complementary, if not equal value, to the more strictly objective aspects of 3D geometry. Much like data visualizations are increasingly important to the big sciences, detailed 3D texture derived from high-quality imaging done at scale can form an important interpretive tool to the information that underlies it. Still, the sheer strangeness, natural complexities, and inherent beauty that may also be revealed through such imaging should not be discounted, as these qualities allow us to encounter the previously unknown and to be gloriously surprised by it. For we too are curious creatures ourselves, and through these visualizations, the illuminating convergence of art and science can often be witnessed. A few notes on the image that I'm showing here. It's of a roughly 3-centimeter male cicada specimen from the teaching collection of Dr. John Cooley of UConn's Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. I used our latest automated 3D capture system to shoot almost 23,000 total images of this insect in 12 hours. These images were first focus stacked and then imported into photogrammetry software to create 3D data to an estimated smallest resolvable detail of 50 microns. Original image acquisition was done mostly unattended, and the system worked through its programmed shooting session. The resulting 3D rendering can then be easily used in virtual classrooms, remote learning, and multidisciplinary research. Here I've turned the specimen over in order to see the very fine sub-millimeter details of the cicada's rib timbal. The thimble is a corrugated exoskeleton structure used by males to produce their distinctive sound. John Cooley and I have worked on other cicada specimens and will continue to do so starting this spring. I invite you to view the UConn Digital Imaging Lab's presence on Sketchfab to follow our ongoing efforts. Lastly, a final note on the large data sets that can come out of such work. All source images and other dependent files that go into a given 3D object acquired and rendered in our lab are archived in the library's open access digital repository. Taken together, these data sets are important for overall transparency, reproducibility of methods, and to further showcase the roles that libraries and the open data that they host can play in 3D research and reuse. I'd like to thank the UConn Library for their continued support of this applied research and development, and to Michael Elsacker for her systems integration and design expertise, and WEI for their industrial automation know-how. It was great to develop these systems together during the past 5 years with these Connecticut-based partners. Here are a few additional resources, including the YouTube videos that I mentioned earlier and a link to our Sketchfab site. And a selected bibliography. And thank you for your attention.
Thanks so much, Michael. And if we could all unmute for a second and give Michael a round of applause. Appreciate that. First off, Michael, I have to say that your XY electrostatic table is dreamy. That's something we've been aspiring to, and I know we've reached out to ask you more about that, but that is a really amazing combination of fairly straightforward technologies, but difficult to implement to really drive a efficient workflow and overcome some of the real difficulties that we challenge in throughput for oversized flat works. So that's a beautiful thing.
Thank you.
People can go ahead and pop the hand for questions. And in the meantime, I've got a question. In considering the quote that you used, which I love, and I'm going to paraphrase, letting computers do what they do best and humans do what they do best. It's a mantra for our studio as well. What areas of your various workflows do you still want to automate, either at the capture stage or the post-processing stage or metadata delivery? Are you working on anything currently specific to those workflows?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is not going to sound very spectacular, but I think would have real world, we would realize a lot of, a substantial amount of efficiency. And it's simply the use of mirrorless cameras, because in many of our workflows, I'm just thinking right now of the film scanning that we do, the 35, well, any type of film capture that we're doing, but also the focus stacking. I'm using mirror lockup to sort of stabilize the camera and not induce any shake. And I think that delay, I could eliminate a lot of that by using a mirrorless system. So I'm going to be experimenting, I think, pretty soon with some of that technology, and I'm hoping to realize some throughput gains in just that. And that's not like a really sexy answer, I know, but I think it's just one of those things where if you keep your eye on existing technology and keep your mind open to how that stuff can be implemented, you can kind of grab low-hanging fruit to help your systems out in that way.
Mm-hmm. And then going back to our original question, how is your department structured, and who's the person that looks through the workflow, has the high-level overview, and investigates the options out there or reaches out to specialists and thinks through what we might want to test on, and then come up with actually breaking down that efficiency into a chart to see, does it pay off in the end to make this investment?
That's me. So, I think about this stuff pretty much regularly, and I reach out to colleagues in the field and vendors, and just kind of poke them with questions that, that I may need to sort of answer some of the questions that you're asking, like, would this be a feasible thing to maybe realize an efficiency, or maybe just improving image quality? Those two things are paramount in my thinking. Is there an easier way that we can increase our speed, or is there an easier way that we can increase our imaging performance? Juggling those two in tandem, and hopefully getting both of those to be optimized is kind of the end goal.